Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. I bang on about Doom a lot in this channel. It's one of my favourite games, so it should be no surprise that I'm a fan of what you punk kids call boomer shooters, a name I hate but have to deal with. Boomer shooters tend to be fast-paced first-person shooting games with an emphasis on running around guns blazing while fighting off hordes of enemies until you get to the exit of the level you are on. Usually these games have a retro aesthetic as well. In other words, they're throwback games to the good old days when there was none of that looking down the sights, regenerating health, or over-the-top military stuff. With that in mind, I want to show you some of the boomer shooters I've been playing recently in case you want to give them a try. So, how about I shut up and we take a look at some games. First up is The Citadel, being shown here on my Steam Deck. This is a fantastic but bloody difficult love letter to games like Wolfenstein 3D. You play as a cyborg martyr lady person and you're set into a huge citadel with 30 floors packed with enemies, hazards and keys to unlock doors. And your only mission is to battle your way through all of the floors and beat all the bosses. But you better have your big boy trousers on because it's really a tough game. At least I found it pretty hard. The levels themselves aren't particularly large and tend to be quite narrow and full of corridors to explore, and you get a whole bunch of enemies to worry about as well. I've only made it to the second chapter so far, and each chapter has 5 or 6 levels and a boss fight, but I have seen a fair few enemy types. Most of them are enemy soldiers, but with various weapons. There's pistol-toting ones, machine gun ones, snipers, flamethrower ones that are a real pain in the ass and take a ton of hits, and so on. All the characters here seem to be female, but despite how some people seem to have tagged this game, it is not a sexy game. Other than the main character having a skimpy outfit and being able to look down and see your knockers, that's the only things that are sexy. But the rest of the characters are fully clothed and remain that way. As enemies can make light work of you, you'll want to defend yourself, and thankfully you get a decent set of weapons here. You start with an axe and a pistol. The axe is powerful, but really is a last resort as enemies don't mess around and won't give you much of an opportunity to get up close. The pistol is accurate and actually quite powerful, and something you'll learn early on here is that headshots are important, really helping you to survive. You get a great machine gun, which was my go-to weapon most of the time, a really cool shotgun that blasts enemies to bits even at a fair distance away, and you get energy weapons as well, which are powerful but can be hard to find ammo for. You're also pretty nimble, running fast, and you can double jump and slide to get around, something that I kept forgetting about and things that definitely would have helped me get out of a few tight spots. You can also lean around corners to take pot shots at enemies and see what's there. This works really well and the game controls perfectly and is very smooth. There's also a few other mechanics in the game. Every few levels you'll meet some friendly people who will sell you items, weapons and even upgrades to help you out in the higher levels. And you also have 3 bars to worry about: health, stamina and hunger. Health and stamina are exactly what you expect, and your hunger bar is very important, as your health and stamina bars can only go as high as your hunger bar, so if you aren't well fed, you can't take as many hits and you can't sprint for very long. You'll find food lying around, as well as in vending machines that are scattered around the levels, and you can buy food from your shop friend as well. Don't ignore it, as it really can mean that there's times where you can literally only take one shot before dying. Graphics wise, the game has a great style. It does look like it could be a Doom mod, but is actually made with Unity. Something that is a bit of a shame though is that enemies only have a forward facing sprite, so there's no way to sneak up on anyone. But they all bleed a lot and can be blown into satisfying pieces. If you like challenging corridor shooters, particularly ones with excellent weapons and shooting mechanics, then you need to give this one a go. Here is Dusk, which is one of the most popular boomer shooters as far as I can tell, and I can really see why. This is a really cool game with a creepy atmosphere and setting. The story goes that some ancient ruins have been discovered under a farm, which is all very Lovecraftian. Monsters and demons are unleashed, and to make things worse, the government wants a slice of that pie too. You play as a nameless treasure hunter who just wanted to get some sweet jewels, but you get caught up in the whole thing and have to battle your way through 3 chapters and around 30 levels. You can tell immediately that Quake is a big influence on this game, with a great gothic art style and retro looking 3D engine. The relatively simple, but by no means bad, graphics help make everything move at a blistering pace here. Each level is pretty large and tends to require you to find a bunch of keys to open the colour-coded doors, and I really like the environments here. You've got some wide open outdoor areas like farms, fields and so on, and then the game changes things up as well, sending you into underground caverns, army bases and even strange worlds in other dimensions. All the levels are basically sandboxes and not linear, so you're free to explore them as much as you like until you've found what you need to open the next area. There's a good selection of weapons here. You get pistols, shotguns, machine guns, and they can all be dual wielded. Even the pistol, which is your starting weapon, has uses later on in the game as well, being accurate and having a good rate of fire. The shotguns are powerful and have a cool reload animation, and the machine gun is a great thing against groups of enemies. You actually start with sickles, and you find them on the farm, and they're also actually pretty powerful as well, but yeah, you gotta be up close to enemies, which is never fun. Then there's the hunting rifle, which is basically a sniper and really powerful, and you get a mortar and riveter, which is basically your rocket launcher. I've got to say, I was a little disappointed that there weren't more crazy weapons, but you do get a magic sword and crossbow in the later stages. Most importantly though, the enemies that you'll be using them on are really good. You've got possessed livestock like goats and deer to deal with, as well as evil scarecrows, chainsaw wielding maniacs, soldiers, rats, giant crocodiles, priests, evil cowgirls and more. Each chapter of the game introduces 3 or 4 new enemies as well, which is great, the more the better. And you'll quickly learn what they can all do, as well as what weapons are best to deal with each one. When there's groups of enemies, you will find yourself instinctively switching weapons and targeting certain ones before others, and the battles here are brilliant and often quite intense. They've also managed to give this game a genuinely creepy atmosphere at times, and it even made me jump more than once. Exploring the dark environments and having a deer jump out of nowhere is horrible, especially with the noises they make, because the sound design here is also great with some excellent ambient music and enemy noises. Then when the action does get crazy, the heavy metal kicks in and life is good. I have beaten this game a couple of times now, and it is one that I can go back to regularly just to blast out a few levels. I will say though that some of the later levels I did find quite annoying, being filled with a strange gravity and teleports all over the place, which I didn't find too fun. But that really is a minor complaint in what is otherwise an excellent game. Next up is Gravelord from Fatbot Games. Now at the time of making this video the game hasn't actually been fully released, but I tried the demo after seeing it featured on Reddit and I've got to say I had a lot of fun with it. You play as a gravedigger who spends his time making his graveyard all nice, except the bastards keep coming back to life thanks to an evil scientist who also happens to be the guy that killed your father. So you're more than happy to keep putting them down. You've had enough by this point, so you jump down into the crypt armed with your trusty shovel and set out to make all the dead people more dead. Now as this is just the demo, you only get 2 levels and a horde mode where you can see how many waves of enemies you can survive. But the 2 levels are fairly large, taking about 10 or 15 minutes to get you through on your first try. This is another game where Quake immediately springs to mind as soon as you start playing, but in a good way. The levels have got a gothic style with the architecture and designs being filled with large wooden doors, crumbling floors, lava pits, fire traps and more. Getting around the levels is easy thanks to the super smooth and responsive controls, and this is another game where you move super fast, but that does suit the game as there tend to be a few enemies after you at any given point and they'll all give you a bit of trouble. And the enemies here come in some nice flavours as well. You get zombies, some of which have guns, some of them just want to eat your face. There's evil rats of course, as what game would be complete without them. As well as flying enemies that are kind of small caker-demons, and there's even a red demon bloke that when you kill them, their heads fall off but will continue to chase you. Bastards. Considering this is the demo, you do get to see a fair few, and I really hope there's plenty more in the full release. And yep, you get a few weapons to deal with them here as well. You start with your shovel, which is actually really handy. It's powerful and fast. You get a pistol, which is a pistol, a shotgun, which is very powerful, especially up close, and a chain gun, which is really good fun to use, but they're really stingy with the ammo for it. Those are all the weapons that I found, though I didn't get all of the secrets yet, so there might be more hidden around somewhere. And of course there'll definitely be more in the final game, I hope. What's cool is that the weapons all get upgraded as well, like the pistol being able to fire 3-round bursts instead of a single shot, but you do need to find these hidden in the levels. Also, the shovel gets a cool upgrade which lets you use it as a kind of grappling teleport thing. You'll see blue crystal looking surfaces, and then when you found the ability you can throw your shovel into one and then pull yourself towards it. This is really fun to use and a great way to get around the levels, and it's handy to use in a firefight when you get used to it as well. But probably my favourite things here are the ability cards that you find in levels. When you come across one, you're given 2 or 3 abilities to choose from. These can range from being able to throw your shovel at enemies to stun them, having helper characters appear, or things like having enemies drop health, ammo or armour whenever they die, things like that. You usually get 3 or 4 cards per level, and you can really make yourself powerful if you choose the right combinations, though they do only last the level that you're on, at least they do in the demo. This is a really cool idea, and I always wanted to try out the new powers. In terms of graphics, as you can see, it looks great. I really like the colours they used here. I did have to turn the brightness up on my capture card though, as the dark areas I couldn't see shit. They also have a slight cel-shaded look to them, which I do like, but it did make it hard to tell what some of the enemies were at times unless you get right up close. I'm a big fan of horror and monsters, so really wanted to get a better idea of what they look like, which was a bit of a shame. And the 2 levels that were here were a lot of fun. They're large, full of switch finding puzzles and big shootouts. It wasn't easy, and they aren't very generous with health power-ups, but it is all manageable and a fair challenge thanks to regular checkpoints. There's very few things for me to moan about here really, but something I would have preferred if they had gone the whole Quake route of not needing to press a button to activate switches. There's times where I was trying to press them while being attacked by enemies, and having to press F to use a button when I wanted to just run into it was a bit annoying. But overall, I had a hell of a lot of fun with this one, and I will definitely be checking out the full version when it's released. Ion Fury was released for the PC and all current consoles. This is the PS5 version. It was published by 3D Realms, who made the Duke Nukem 3D games, and it uses the same build engine that was used to create that classic. In fact, at first glance you could be forgiven for thinking it's a mod of some sort, and I definitely don't mean that in a bad way. The story goes that you play as Shelley Harrison, who is tasked with taking down an evil doctor who's been creating all sorts of abominations. A simple enough story, but to be honest, in a game like this, that's all you need. As soon as you start playing, you can tell this game is going to be fun. The graphics are fantastic, and they really push the engine with some nice lighting effects and a good amount of detail on just about everything. The gameplay is fast, frantic and smooth, and it's also a very challenging game. While there is a disappointing number of enemy varieties in the game, what they lack in variety they do make up for in pure firepower. There's only about 10 or so different enemy types, which my guess is still more than games like Call of Duty, but in a game like this I always expect to see a new enemy every few levels. Here you've seen most of what you're going to after the first 2 or 3. Yeah, there are some bigger ones that show up later, but for most of the game you'll be fighting the same little robot crab things and cyborg soldiers. But like I said, all of them do put up a good fight, and when you're fighting 5 or more enemies at the same time, it's very challenging, even on the medium difficulty. Part of this is due to the fact that most of the enemies are hit scanners, which means that if you're in range, they're just locked onto you permanently, and unless you're behind cover, you can't really avoid their attacks. But this is what games were like back in the day, so if you did grow up with games like this, or you're like me and still play them anyway, then taking cover is almost second nature as it is. And as it is a retro throwback, there's none of that regenerating health rubbish. You get shot and you'll be seeking out health kits. I do actually prefer this though, as it makes taking damage a genuine threat, not like in games where as long as there's a wall nearby you can just nip behind it and you'll be fine. There is a modest selection of weapons, though I do have to admit this is probably one of the game's biggest weaknesses. You start with your standard pistol, which is actually pretty damn powerful and accurate. You get a shotgun, which doubles up as a grenade launcher, and some twin machine guns, you know, the usual suspects. These will be your go-to weapons for pretty much the whole game, and to be honest, I rarely found myself using anything else. You do get grenades that act more like bowling balls, which are useless if there's stairs nearby. There's a minigun and a crossbow, but these kind of feel a bit useless. The crossbow especially being disappointing as the game's most powerful weapon. You'd usually get something like a BFG or a lightning gun. Sure, it is kind of powerful, but often doesn't even kill regular soldiers in just one shot. With each weapon also having a secondary fire mode, the crossbow one fires out 5 shots and a lot of them will miss everything. Most of the time it's kind of useless. Whereas your starting pistol's alternate fire lets you lock onto up to 6 enemies at once and headshot them all, killing them instantly. Another thing that was noticeable to me was how scarce ammo is, especially for the machine gun and shotgun. I'd go long periods of time with no ammo for either of them, and I'd have to backtrack through the level to find hidden ammo stashes. I'm sure this is a deliberate design choice, but I just always felt like I needed more ammo for all of my weapons all the time. But don't get me wrong, the gunplay here is still very good. I do actually have this on PC as well, and I have to say it plays a lot better there with the keyboard and mouse. But like I mentioned, the controls are smooth and responsive. The damage model here is also done so you can shoot limbs off of enemies, which always makes everything satisfying. Another thing that feels old school here is the level design. As with most games like this, you don't really have any objectives per se. You just need to get to the end of each level by finding the coloured keys and making it to the end. It can be easy to get lost or to overlook a secret hidden door that holds an item you need, or you might run past a switch a few times. And there's a good few times where I spent a good half an hour looking for a key that was right under my nose the whole time, but for some reason I never really got frustrated about this. I think that's because just exploring the environments is actually fun. In fact, that's something else I would have liked more of. More variety in the environments. Most of the places you explore are industrial futuristic buildings that will get a bit samey. It would have been nice to have a bit more variety and some better outdoor levels. Overall though, I had an absolute blast playing this through. It was challenging and took me about 6 hours to beat the whole thing. If you enjoy old school games, then this one is definitely a must play. It's smooth, has a great sense of humour, with plenty of movie and game references in here, and it's got a really cool soundtrack to boot. Warhammer 40,000 Boltgun is a really cool retro style first person shooter that kind of came out of nowhere. Well, it did for me, but it's a hell of a lot of fun to play. This is also the PS4 version. Guess who went mad on Warhammer games in the January sale? You play as a Stern Guard veteran Ultramarine, and it turns out that a rogue tech priest is being a bit of a shitbag and has managed to open up a rift in space that has brought through some chaos monsters. So you get your bolt gun and you set off to take down the tech priest as well as his disciples and any of the chaos monsters you meet along the way. As you can see, this is all done in the style of old school shooters like Doom, with some really cool pixel characters and enemies over some 3D levels that wouldn't look out of place in the Quake 2 engine. You'll travel through a variety of areas like icy wastelands, temples, forts, army bases and even strange alien worlds. You'll be attacked by basically everything you meet, but as a Space Marine you are pretty handy with a few weapons. You've got your bolt gun as your main one, and this is what you'll be using for a good chunk of the game. But you'll also find a shotgun, laser rifle, minigun and rocket launcher thingy. All of the weapons feel great to use and can actually be upgraded a bit as you progress, including giving them some elemental damage at certain points. As well as this, you can find a few grenades to use, and you even have your chainsword, which is great but kind of dangerous to use, as you've got to get up close. Something that I like is that enemies all have their own life bar, and some enemies are weaker against certain weapons. This really helps you in the middle of battles to see what's doing the most damage. And the battles get pretty bloody difficult, with dozens of enemies coming at you at once, and more spawning in all the time. Enemies also have a ton of different attack patterns. Some have guns, some throw shit at you, some just want to bite your face off up close, and you really need to assess the battleground to see what to take out first. Thankfully, no matter what you kill, they tend to explode in a torrent of cool blood, which is always good. I recommend using your chainsword when enemies are weakened, and you can leave yourself vulnerable otherwise. And no matter what you do, keep on moving if you want to stay alive. The levels are all fairly large, and there's a surprising amount of them. In fact, I was really surprised at how long this game is. As it's old school, your main thing to do is just find the exit of each level, so you got to hunt down keys or switches to open locked doors and kill everything you see. I will say that there were more times that I would have liked where I got lost because the levels all kind of looked similar and I couldn't really tell where I had and hadn't been, and I'd be wandering around for ages looking for a key or a switch that I didn't know was a switch. Thankfully, the controls are really good here. They have a deliberate amount of weight to them as you're a Space Marine in a massive suit of armour, so moving, turning and jumping all has momentum and weight that you don't often see in games like this. It did take me a while to get used to the mechanics, and going back to record this footage, I was definitely rusty. But it soon comes back to you and is a hell of a lot of fun. And that's a great way to sum this one up. It's a hell of a lot of fun. If you're into difficult old school shooters, then this really is a must have. My only real complaints would be the graphics department, which while it does look great, and of course I love the retro style, I still would have liked to have seen a bit more animation on the enemies here. Yeah, I know it is old school, but still, it is modern and they could have done a little bit better. Also, the levels can be confusing to get around. Other than that though, I really had fun with this, and I highly recommend it to any FPS fan, even if you don't care about Warhammer 40,000. Here is Forgive Me Father, an awesome first-person shooter shown here on my lovely Steam Deck. Here you play as a priest who appears to be the only person not to have succumbed to an evil plague that's taken over the city and possibly the world. Thankfully you're handy with a gun, so set out to find answers and see if you can do your religious duty and put a stop to all of it. It's what the kids call a boomer shooter, which as an old man is yet another term that I hate, but hey, at least you know what you're in for, but not really. It's a tough shooter featuring plenty of enemies for you to kill, along with a cool retro comic book style aesthetic. And yes, the gameplay is quite old school. You're placed in some large levels which are indeed packed with enemies, most of which are various types of zombie that will be shambling after you in an attempt to eat your face. Though there are a lot of types here, and some will have guns, some fire energy projectiles, some explode and more. And this is a game with a heavy Lovecraftian influence, meaning there's plenty of other horrific monsters with squid faces that appear to kill you as well. Thankfully, you do get some decent weapons to take them on with. You start with a knife, which is actually pretty fun to use, but yep, enemies have to be close to you, so you need to be careful. Then you get pistols, shotguns, machine guns, and even Tesla-inspired laser weapon upgrades later in the game, but I'm not quite that far. You will explore towns, cult bases, swamps, and even more suspicious places as you uncover clues as to what the hell's going on and where you might need to go to get to the bottom of it all, and the game does a really great job of mixing things up. Being an old school style shooter, you don't have to worry about complicated objectives, and essentially the game is just about getting from A to B. You will need to find keys to unlock the various locked doors in the levels so you can progress though. Enemies are everywhere though, and they really pack a punch. Expect to die a lot here. Even though I say this is a boomer shooter, really you don't want to play it like that. You definitely want to take your time and hold back. Something that is a little annoying is that there's little to no saving other than the checkpoints in levels, so you can't save scum like I like to do. A group of even 4 or 5 enemies can be very dangerous, especially if they have projectile attacks. Thankfully there is no hit scanning. What I love though is that each enemy has weak points, so zombies you can just shoot in the head, but others you might need to aim for their oxygen tanks or a certain limb to do massive damage. This really makes the combat feel unique, and I would pay close attention to the enemies that I was actually fighting to make sure that I could take them out with easy weak spots first. Also, killing enemies gets you XP and you can level up. There's lots of options to choose from improving your character for more health to better weapons and even upgrades to the weapons that you already have. It's great, and the only thing that kinda sucks is that it's a game where you can't fully upgrade everything, and in fact you are forced to make choices that lock out other options, so choose wisely. I did still die a lot though, and learning enemy placement was very handy for me, but once you play the game for a bit and get used to your movement and how everything should be taken a bit more slowly, things become much easier. I mean, it's still definitely not easy, and I didn't really like the checkpoint system. It was annoying, but other than that I really had a blast. Graphics wise, the game really looks incredible. I absolutely love the art style here, and everything just looks great. The environments are colourful but also covered in shadow and dark, and you'll need to light the areas with your lamp. They're also packed with hidden areas as well, and the enemy designs are great also. There isn't much in the way of animation here, which is a bit of a shame, but honestly you don't really notice it when you're playing as things tend to be too frantic. But as always, even though I did die a lot, I never wanted to give up and I always kept coming back for more. Basically, this is exactly my kind of game. If you're into first-person shooters, then I highly recommend giving this one a go. As is usually the case with me, I do also have the sequel, but I haven't played it yet, though that's mainly because I haven't quite finished this one. I hope it's just as good, and I can't wait to try it out. Project Warlock is another fast-paced shooter with its own style that, if I had to compare it to something, would be more like Ken's Labyrinth or the Catacomb Abyss if you're old or cool enough to have played those. Here you play as a trampy looking guy as you head out across 5 unique chapters, fighting your way to the boss and saving the world. As you can see, the graphical style here is very unique and I love it. It's almost cel shaded with some nice textures over basic 3D models. All of the enemies here are 2D sprites, but they look fantastic and have some really nice animation. And like pretty much every game here, the design of everything just looks awesome. The different chapters in the game will see you exploring castles, desert cities, arctic tundras and more, and each world has its own unique enemies and boss. Of course, you get a great selection of weapons to fight these enemies with as well. You've got your pistols, shotguns, miniguns, rocket launchers, crossbows and more, and they can all be upgraded. You get experience points throughout the levels by finding secrets and treasure, and between each chapter you can use these to upgrade your weapons or give yourself magic abilities or more health, that sort of thing. The magic abilities range from things like being able to heal yourself, summon ammo drops, to move or fire faster, or even fire magic projectiles. Watch out though, as you can only modify your weapons and choose your magic once each, so if you choose something you don't like, well, tough luck buster. I did find the magic powers a little bit useless here, which was a bit of a shame. Now this could be because I'm more of a run-in guns blazing kind of player, so I rarely even used the magic and never found that I had enough upgrade points to get the interesting ones anyway. The only ones I really used were the healing ones and ammo drops, but I guess depending on the kind of player you are, this could be very different. Something else that was disappointing were the bosses. They look really cool, but I found them incredibly easy and they're literally just a case of shoot them till they die, and as long as you don't stand still, you're pretty much guaranteed to win every time. Now I played through the game on the normal difficulty, so I'm sure they put up more of a fight on the higher ones, but also it's just the fact that there's no specific weak spot or strategy to killing any of these bosses. You just keep shooting and don't get shot yourself. They did all look awesome though, so that's something. The levels themselves are also very small and short. Each chapter only took me about an hour to get through. Admittedly, I wasn't trying to find all the secrets or power-ups, but longer levels or more of them would have been a nice thing. Having said that though, this is still an extremely fun game that plays really well, looks good and has an awesome soundtrack. So if you're a fan of retro-style FPS games like I am, you should definitely give this one a go. And finally for today, here is Reverend, also shown on my Steam Deck. This is a very cool but strange feeling shooter that's clearly inspired by games like Blood and Rise of the Triad. You play as a former Reverend who has seen some shit, and now has decided enough is enough and is going to fight back against the evil that he's seen. As with a lot of games like this, the story doesn't really play too much into it, it's more just an excuse to get you blasting enemies in the face in some strange places. So it's got a creepy theme, with your town being overrun by possessed people, demons and even ghosts, but it's alright, nothing a swift shotgun blast to the face won't fix. As with many games these days, you can buy this on Steam, but you're only getting the first chapter, with the rest coming soon, I hope. But I would say that the first chapter is still worth playing. It's creepy, got a cool vibe and is fun to play through, though this is probably the most jank-filled of all the games we've looked at today. Gameplay here is what you'd expect. You explore some pretty large levels that are packed with enemies, items, weapons and keys. You'll want to find the keys, collect the weapons and kill the enemies until you get to the end of the level. The levels can be tricky to get around, but I did always find them fun to explore. The game's strange atmosphere really helps with this. Most of the levels are real world areas like towns, shopping centres, gardens and so on, and there's plenty of hidden areas in them all, and most of them start to get a bit stranger the closer you are to the exit, which really makes you want to press on and see what the strange shit is around the corner. Enemies come out in a few varieties. There's your usual cult members, possessed people with weapons like knives or guns, and then you get these stranger, more demonic enemies like flying eyeball things, evil goats with bat wings, and strange turret demon dudes, and there's even a phallic boss at the end as well. These can all be killed with a few bullets to the face, and the weapons here also have a cool feel to them. You start with a meat tenderizing mallet and a pistol, which you can eventually dual wield. Then you get a shotgun, some apples that explode for some reason and act as your rocket launcher, and you even get a skull of an enemy that fires teeth, which is your machine gun. The weapons are all really unique and satisfying to use, but that doesn't make things easy by any means. This is a really tough game thanks to some annoying hit scanning enemies and the crazy amounts of damage they inflict. It is really easy to die here if you're not careful, and I recommend edging into rooms and scoping out what's in there before going crazy. Enemies will spot you a mile off and are incredibly accurate. And what is a bit annoying is that there's no indication of what direction you're being attacked from, and thanks to the graphics it can be hard to make enemies out in the dark, pixelated environments. And speaking of the graphics, I actually really like them. The enemies are all digitized and look bad, but good bad if you know what I mean. It's a deliberate style choice that really fits the whole theme and atmosphere of the game. There isn't much in the way of animation though, which I think could have been improved. The environments are really dark and very pixelated, but again, this is the style. And while I do think it would make things easier if things were a little cleaner, I'm not sure it would fit the look of the game, so it does still work here. And you do get a flashlight, which comes in very useful. Though the really dark pixely areas does mean that it is often hard to spot enemies, keys and items, and some points are crazy hard as you just don't know where the enemies are hiding, and you have to reload over and over again until you finally figure out where they are. Remember, the quick save button is your best friend here. Sounds like I'm being a bit hard on the game, but don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed it. I love this sort of look and feel for games, it's weird and creepy and right up my alley. I'm excited for the next chapter to be released and I will be playing through the whole thing. I recommend you do as well, if you like challenging games. So there you go, a bunch of boomer shooters that you might want to try. Which one is your favourite? And don't worry, I do have a ton more of these games like Proteus, Head-On, Dread Templar and so on, so I'm sure there'll be a part 2 in the future. But do keep making your suggestions for me. This is probably my favourite genre of game, so I will play as many as I can, as long as I can run them on my Steam Deck. I want to say a big thank you to my patron, and of course you can also be a patron where you'll get your name on this funky little title screen here. On screen now you can see where you can follow me, so why not do so? I've got loads of cool content for everyone to enjoy. And now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.